And welcome back to the Ruby Tuesday. My name is Ruben, and this is another review from Hulu. It's an original called No Man's Land. A family grieves the death of their daughter in a suicide bombing. Meanwhile, her brother suspects she is still alive after glimpsing her in a news report and sets off to find her in the Middle East. 8 episodes long, about an hour long each, and you're gonna wish there was more. I haven't come across a story this intriguing for a long time. For the most part, Netflix and Disney, they all put out what I would consider to be very familiar storylines. They do the tried and tested storylines that we like, the hero, the anti-hero. This one I felt was quite brave and quite different, also quite original. The closest I can compare this to is called The Caliphate. I believe that's on Netflix as well. It's one of the most intense series I've ever watched. Gripping and just heart-wrenching as well. And there are similar aspects, but this one is interesting because we kind of have 3 stories going on here intertwined. So we see the brother who has seen this picture of what he considers to be his sister. He doesn't know for sure. It's like the back of her head, just doing her hair up, and he's like, I can't leave this alone. If she is alive, I'm gonna go and find her. So we start going on this kind of like a detective story, trying to track her down, and we end up in Syria. And at the same time, we start seeing this group of young guys that have grown up together in England, and they are friends, and they come from a very, very poor background. They end up kind of converting to ISIS, but it's interesting that the way they show that, and so that's one of the other storylines. And then we have another storyline where we get to see what happened to the sister, her storyline. So we have the brother storyline, the sister storyline, and these guys that are part of ISIS. And what we see is when these worlds clash and those storylines converge, what happens in that. I have to say I was riveted the whole way through, even though the story does tend to take a bit of its time between kind of dialogue dumping, exposition dumping, because there's so much going on, because there's so much story to tell. But that's okay, because when they're doing that, it's in an action sequence or it's in a movement, so you don't mind it. It's not just dumping for the sake of it. It's one of my pet peeves in storytelling. If you can't express to your viewers what's going on without moving the plot forward further, then you're not doing your job right. But I have to say they do it well here. One of the other characters I really like is the score. The score is totally a character in this series. From the outro to the intro to the end credits to the music during it, it just places you in the zone. But what carries this series is definitely the protagonists, and we've got quite a lot. You feel for the plight even for these guys that end up joining ISIS. Not that what they're doing is right, but you can see how they got there, and you kind of are willing them to kind of see the light and maybe understand that there's more going on than what they expect. They've definitely drunk the Kool-Aid, but you can see how they've drunk the Kool-Aid, how they got there. You follow those steps and you're like, oh man, you can totally see that these guys were being groomed or falling into a way of life that was very attracted to them compared to what the lifestyles they were living, and because of certain events that happen in their life, they end up going this extreme way. And so when you get to the crux, when you see them doing stuff that is just horrible, you understand, not that it's right, but you understand how they got there. And so it's very interesting that the storytellers decided to kind of give so much background, so much story to what is essentially the bad guys, which makes this series so much more stronger, so much more interesting and rich. And that's what I felt like when I was watching this series. It's rich in character development. Each of the stories, you really get to grips with the character. You see what makes them tick. We have the brother who kind of has to give up his life, and he has a great life, to go and find his sister. And you see him change and progress as a character to something completely different, really, by the end. And there's this push and pull, because he's definitely a fish out of water when he gets into places like war zones, when he finds himself confronted with these female fighters, the Kurdish fighters that are joining the resistance to defeat this new group. At the time, it was a new group, this ISIS group, and try and free their land and try and stop what's happening. And so you see how he's got to come to terms quickly. He's got to learn the ropes. He's on this really, really dangerous path, but he's willing to do that for his loved one. And so you feel for the plight of each of these characters. There's nothing you can do as a viewer. You just have to go for along the ride and see what this director has chosen to show us with their storylines. There was one little weird thing. I don't know if it's because of the screeners we got from Hulu, but there's a lot of when it cuts, there's just black screen. And sometimes it's just 1 second extra too long. It feels uncomfortable. It feels like a choice they've made. Not that they've run out of footage, but it's just like, well, that's weird, a blank screen. Why have they done that? So let me know when you're watching this on Hulu. Maybe they edited it differently. Maybe that's just because of the screeners. I'm not sure. Maybe it's time for ads. I guess that could be a reason, but it was a little thing that kind of took me out a bit of the episodes, and I was like, that's a very strange decision. Each of our, I guess, 6 main protagonists, 7 main protagonists, are so well defined that you either love or hate them, and that's because they've really, really grown those bad guys. Like I was saying, you understand where they come from. So by the time we have the confrontations, it's not just shoot, action because of the sake of it. It's everything has a momentum behind it. Everything is tense and drawn to a sequence. Every sequence and frame and shot is there. It's moving the arc forward. You never feel like you're just staying in a place. You never feel like an episode is drawing out. Sometimes there is a longish sequence in a particular place or an event that's happening that takes a bit longer, but for the most part, your characters are on a journey, literally on a journey from movement from town to different places where they have to protect or overrun, or depending on which story we're following, there is this journey. It is an adventure. It's a harrowing adventure storyline, and so by the time you get to the end, you are so invested in these characters, but you kind of don't know who you're invested in because there's a lot of main protagonists. That would be my only kind of negative drawback, because we do have our 2 main protagonists, but because they've built up so many of the characters along the way, you kind of want to know what's happening with those characters. And I have to say, don't be surprised by the ending. The ending for me, I was a bit weirded on, because it feels like it's a contained singular story, but the way they leave it makes me wonder what's happening to our characters. What will happen to them? They don't really close off any of the stories. It's just ongoing. I guess it's a way for you to kind of figure out that this is stuff that's happening, it's ongoing, and it will always be that way. This is the sort of story that is told. There's an interesting I think James Purejoy, he plays one of my favorite characters. I think it was the following, great bad guy. And in this, he is kind of, well, I don't want to really say what he is. His story was interesting to me because it's interesting. You are conflicted about who the bad guys are in this series always, because it feels like people manipulate each other no matter what side you're on. And so you always feel conflicted about, okay, I understand what they're doing is good, but, it's that sort of saying that the greater good sort of thing. You can do bad because of the greater good. You can kill those people because of the greater good. You justify your evil for the greater good, for Queen and country, that sort of saying. And so they justify things, they justify what they're doing. Good guys justify, but I guess the good guys is a perspective. So even the Kurdish soldiers, they have to kill people. ISIS and intelligence agencies will manipulate circumstances to protect their own homeland. We get to see the kind of nuances in manipulation between agencies and people that become, I guess, their assets. And I thought that was very interesting. It was an interesting story to tell in amongst these 3 main stories. The cinematography is excellent, and as you can imagine, because of the scenery itself, a lot of it is like desert area shots, as you can imagine. A lot of it's like broken walls, very run down places to watch. All of that lends to very wide open landscape scenery, and if shot well, can give you the sense of, wow, we're really kind of in the middle of nowhere. They're in a place of danger, and you do get that. But I loved some of the personal shots, even in the desert shots. There is just a slight punch or move in with the camera, just a slight slow movement, and then it'll go to a wide. And that sort of filmmaking puts you in the moment, gives you an idea of where you're at, and then makes it personal. And so that it just adds that much more feeling for you to be invested in those characters. There's little things that are done like that throughout the series that makes this one of the most interesting stories that I've watched. And the story is very interesting. When you think it's going one way, when you think you've guessed what's going to happen, it kind of pivots on its head and follows another character, and you're like, oh, okay, we're going this route now. And then it comes back and joins up the two stories that you didn't know that were going to join up, and you're like, oh, so that's how that happened. And then you think you've figured it out, and it does something else, which I really like. Because we have so many storylines, they really did need to join up all the puzzle pieces together, and they do that well. It's a phenomenal series. I urge everybody to watch it. It isn't a high-octane action. If you've seen a trailer, you may think that's what they're trying to tell viewers, that this is what it is. There's a few action sequences, but for most part, it's a drama thriller, and it's very tragic. It's a tragic story from the outset. But there is a sense of fruition. So I'm going to give this a solid A. Do chat to me in the comments below. Have you seen any other series like this? Have you seen Caliphate? I have a review on my channel for that as well. It's fantastic. One of the best. And this will go up there in that same kind of drama series, same kind of storytelling. Yeah, very interesting. I'm sure this will touch a few buttons and some people will be upset by this. I thought it was fantastic. But quite hard to watch in certain places. You'll understand what I mean when you watch it. Let me know if you're going to check this out. I'm going to do an ending review because I feel like we kind of need to talk about the ending. There's stuff there to speak about, so look out for that. But for the most part, we've got loads of other content coming out. Do chat to me in the comments below. But most of all, until next time, remember, live long and Tuesday.